Today I'm going to go through a couple of different evaluation approaches for capital expenditures. So I did a series of videos on calculating net present value and the discounted cash flow, and that's probably the most commonly used approach. There are some textbooks that use different approaches called flow-through equity or adjusted present value. So I'm going to go through those today and give you an example. So before we get to actually doing an example, I'll go over the three different approaches that some textbooks use. The first one, FTE approach, is called the flow-through equity. The second one is the APV, or the adjusted present value approach. And the third one is called the WACC approach, weighted average cost of capital. This actually is just another way of saying the net present value approach. Okay, so that's the one that most people are aware of for the most part. I'll go over the formulas first, and then we'll do one example, and that helps to illustrate the way things are. So first of all, let's do the formula for flow through. Actually, let's start with the adjusted present value, the APV approach. Okay, so the formula for this is that you take the sum of all of the values, okay, during the life of the project. You take the unlevered cash flow at time t, and you divide it by 1 plus RU, which is the unlevered cost of equity, to the power of t. Okay, and then, so this is going to give you all of the positive cash flows. You add to that the effects of debt, and you subtract the initial investment. And that will give you the APV. And just like the NPV approach, if this is greater than 0, then you proceed. So let me break down first of all what each of these is. UCF is equal to the unlevered cash flow. So it's the cash flow from the project, assuming that you have no debt whatsoever. Okay? RU is the unlevered cost of equity. So the cost of equity for a firm that has no debt. So this naturally is going to be a positive cash flow. So you would expect any investment that you're making is going to be generating some positive cash. The effects of debt is also positive. That is, generally speaking, going to be the tax savings, because your interest is tax deductible. And then the initial investment is going to be negative, because that's going to be a cash outflow. So if you add those all together, and if you end up with a positive number, just like NPV, then you'd go ahead and you proceed with the investment. Now, what is the flow-through equity approach? Formula is a little bit different. The flow-through equity uses levered cash flow. Okay, so we'll have the same time horizon, the life of the project, except now we're going to use the levered cash flow at time t, divided by 1 plus R, I'll say L, which is the levered cost of equity, minus initial investment minus the amount of debt, the amount borrowed. So let's write this down. LCF is the levered cash flow. So that's the cash flow that's available to equity after the debt interest has been paid off. And RL is the levered cost of equity. So the cost of equity for the firm that has debt. The initial investment is straightforward. The amount borrowed is straightforward. It's debt. Now this is going to be positive. Okay, this is going to be negative. And it's the same thing. If this is greater than 0, then you invest. Okay, now the interesting thing about this one is, what does this actually mean? This is the investment minus the amount borrowed. So what they're trying to do is trying to find out what is the actual equity investment. So I'll call this the net equity investment. So it does not include money that you borrowed, because it's done from the perspective of the shareholders. So they care a little bit less about that. They only care about what they're putting in. And the third one is the WACC approach. And this one I've done several videos on. This is basically NPV. Okay. And then you can say that if this is also greater than 0, then you invest. And the formula for NPV is pretty simple. It is the life of the project. You take the unlevered cash flow at time t divided by 1 plus the weighted average cost of capital. Okay, so not the cost of equity any longer, minus the initial investment. Okay, and this, again, this is going to be positive, and this is going to be negative. And remember here, the weighted average cost of capital, this in the other videos we talked about, that's the hurdle rate. So that's the minimum rate, or it's the minimum return that all investments must earn. For the company. Okay, so for that specific company, all investments must earn at least that cost of capital. So those are the three approaches, and now we're going to do an actual example with these.